unemployment. So we finished the empirical section of macroeconomics, right? We discussed gross domestic product, we looked at unemployment rate, and we also looked at what? The inflation rate. So in the empirical section, we looked at the definition of all these concepts. We looked at how we measure these variables, and also what are some of the problems that the Bureau of Economic Analysis and the Bureau of Labor Statistics, right, whose job is to collect information on these variables that they face while measuring these variables. So from now on, so that was your empirical macroeconomics. From now on, we'll look at some simple models, okay, that will try to allow us to understand how these variables are determined for the economy. So for example, why is GDP at a certain level, isn't it? That might come to your mind, that question. So what explains why GDP is sitting at $16 trillion and not at $13 trillion, for example, isn't it? So in other words, how the value of real GDP is determined. That's the subject matter of this class. So we'll try to understand that. And later on, we'll look at the theory behind inflation, theory behind unemployment rate, and all those things. So from now on, we are just going to look at the models to understand how the economy works. Okay. So the reference for today's chapter is chapter 8 from your textbook. And if you remember, as I said last time, that we are going to divide our economy into 4 sectors, right? What are those sectors? At the very beginning, the first class, we discussed that. So what are those 4 sectors that we are going to divide our economy in? Households, government, firms, foreign sector. That's correct. So we are going to divide our economy into 4 broadly defined sectors: households, firms, government, and the foreign sector. And we also divided our economy into 4 broadly defined markets. What were those markets? Who remembers it?
Goods and services.
Goods and services market.
Money market.
Money market.
Labor market.
Labor market.
And the
Foreign exchange market. Okay. So what we'll do today, we'll start with a very simple model of an economy, and then we'll add on more complexities to it. We'll make it more realistic, to mimic the real world. But for the time being, we'll start with the simplest possible model that allows us to understand how the level of GDP, real GDP, is determined, okay, in an economy. So that's our primary objective, to understand Okay, and so we'll start with a 2-sector economy, and we'll focus our interest only on the goods and services market. Okay, for the time being, forget about the money market, the labor market, and the foreign exchange market. Forget about the other sectors, government and the foreign sector. We'll add those later on. Once we develop our simple model, we'll add government, we'll add the foreign sector, we'll add other markets. But first we have to understand how the value of real GDP is determined in an economy. Okay. So to understand that, we'll keep our model simple, and we'll consider a two-sector economy. Where you have households and the firms. Okay. So our economy consists of only two sectors for the time being: households and firms. And if you remember from chapter 6, how GDP is calculated, how GDP is measured for an economy, there are two ways, right? Either you use expenditure method or you use income method. And both of them result in the same figure for you, isn't it? So what we'll do, we know that either you use expenditure method or income method, GDP is going to be the same, right? So we'll denote GDP, real GDP, or the value of aggregate output, or aggregate expenditure, or aggregate income, all those things by a letter Y. So let's say Y denotes the aggregate output. Aggregate income, or real GDP. So we'll use these terms interchangeably, and all of them mean pretty much the same thing, right? Aggregate output, how much the economy has produced of goods and services in a given period, right? Or aggregate income, how much factor incomes were generated, and real GDP. They all mean the same thing. So Y represents your real GDP or aggregate output or aggregate income. Also, total quantity of goods and services supplied. You can think of it that way. Okay? Is that fine with everybody? What we mean by Y here? Go ahead. Do you have a question? So that's your aggregate output. So let's suppose you want to calculate GDP for this economy, where you have only two sectors present, households and firms. One way we can do it is by looking at all the expenditures made by households, isn't it? And all the expenditures made by the firms in the economy in a given year, right? And you add the two, you will get the GDP for this economy, isn't it? Using the expenditure method. You remember Y equals to C plus I plus G plus X minus M, right? So forget about G and X minus M, because we don't have those sectors present in the economy, but we have households and firms. So basically, if you have just two sectors, you add the expenditure made by households, C, and expenditures made by firms, which is investment, isn't it? And if you add the two, you will get the GDP for this simple economy, right? All right, so let's try to understand the consumption behavior of households, okay? And then we'll try to understand the behavior of firms with regards to investment, okay? So let's focus on the first component of your GDP, which is consumption. So the question that we need to address is, what does consumption depend on? What are the factors that influence a household's consumption? What do you think will affect your consumption? What factors will drive it?
How much you make.
How much you make. In other words, your income. isn't it? That's the primary determinant of how much you are going to consume, right? We know if your income is high, right, you tend to consume more, right? If your income is low, you tend to consume less, right? So what kind of relationship we see between consumption and household's income? Positive, negative? What kind of relationship is that? Your consumption increases, and your income increases, and your consumption increases as well. What kind of relationship is that? Positive. That's correct, right? Both variables are moving in the same direction, right? So other than your income, so let me use a little notation. So consumption is a function of, it depends on, read F as function or depends on, household's income. So Y denotes your income, let's say. Okay. As I said, Y will denote a lot of things, but they all mean the same. Here right now we are focusing on one consumer, but you add it up and it becomes aggregate income in the economy, right? So let's say Y stands for consumer's income, or you can always have I or some other term for it. What else will consumption depend on? Other than income, what else drives your consumption? Income is the only driver of consumption, or is there something else?
Like where you live.
Where you live? What do you mean? Can you elaborate on that?
Like what country? Like, in the U.S., people tend to consume more than people in
But that might be due to income levels. Per capita income is high in the U.S. as opposed to in some other countries. I'm not sure if look at other rich countries, the consumption is pretty much very similar to American lives, isn't it? Only thing is the composition of the bundle that they consume might be different, right? You live in America, you drive bigger cars because it's more spacious, roads are wider, gas is cheap, but you still drive cars in Europe and in other countries where you can afford, and everybody has cars, right? Where you need car, they'll have car, right? So income pretty much captures that, I think, what you're saying. Or do you have anything else in mind other than income that is driving it? Cultural factors or something like that, you're saying?
Maybe, not sure.
Maybe. Cultural factors might play a role. Some societies tend to, emphasize saving more than, income, consumption. So, Eastern societies, you would see less consumption relative to Western societies, even though affluence level might be the same. That might be a factor here. Anything else that might drive consumption? Go ahead.
Prices of goods?
Prices of the goods. Obviously, that will affect it, yeah. But income will capture that aspect of it, right? If you need something, okay, that's correct.
If you want something?
If you want something, okay. What else? Look, in terms of, I think you're all right, what you're saying, at the micro level, those things are driving consumption, for sure. But think, this is a macroeconomics class, so think in terms of macro variables. What are some other macro variables, that might affect consumption? Go ahead.
Resources?
Resources. So availability of goods, basically, you're looking at in terms of that, okay. What else? So let me give you a simple example that might lead you towards what drives your consumption. You use credit cards, right? And so if your APR on the card is 30%, and then you have an APR of, let's say, 5%, when are you more likely to swipe your card at Walmart? When the APR is 25% or 5%? 5 because interest rate is lower. Interest rate is what here? What does it represent for you?
Your expenditures.
basically cost of borrowing money, right? When you use your credit card, you're borrowing money, right, to consume. And how much you have to pay, that's your interest rate. In addition to the price of the good, you also have to pay some interest because you're borrowing money from some financial institution that issued you credit card, right? So cost of borrowing money will also drive your consumption. If you have to pay low interest, you are likely to consume a little more, as opposed to if you have to pay a very high interest, isn't it? If you are financing it by using your credit card, because you have to pay your interest payment till you make the full payment, isn't it? So interest rate is another important driver of consumption, right? So interest rate, let's capture it by the term R. Okay. Interest rate would also drive your consumption. Does that make sense to everybody? Why interest rate would play a role here in determining how much you consume? Okay. What else? There are other factors. Wealth. Wealth will also play a role. Wealthy people, wealth is not the same thing as income. Income is, so every period what you earn, right? It's a flow rate, basically. And wealth is like, you might have inherited something without, even earning it, isn't it, from your parents or something. Wealthy people tend to consume more, isn't it? So wealth is another driver of consumption. And there's also another factor, macroeconomic, variable that's very important, and we can refer to as animal spirit, as John Maynard Keynes, the father of macroeconomics. He coined that phrase, animal spirit, and so I can write it for you. Basically, it refers to the wave of pessimism and optimism that prevails in an economy. Okay, and he called it animal spirit. So let's use theta to denote animal spirit. Okay, so if theta is increasing, you can think of people becoming more optimistic about the future state of the economy. Okay. And if theta is decreasing, let's think of people becoming pessimistic about the future state of the economy. And that will also drive your consumption patterns, isn't it? If you are not optimistic about the future state of the economy, you might be thinking that if economy is not going to do well tomorrow, I might not have a job, isn't it? I might lose my job, and if I lose my job, I won't have enough income to pay for all the consumption, isn't it? So that will also affect your consumption level, right? You would cut back, try to save for the rainy days and so on. And if you are optimistic about the future state of the economy, then you are likely to consume more, isn't it? If you are pretty confident that the economy is doing very well and it will continue to do so in the near future, and you'll have your job, I think your consumption level will go a little bit higher because you're more confident about the future state of the economy, isn't it? So theta will capture that aspect. We will call it animal spirit. It captures sentiments of people. Okay. So these are some of the important macro variables that will affect consumption levels, right? So what will just to capture what we discussed, we know if income goes up, consumption will go up, right? Positive relationship. So let's use a plus sign underneath it, and that tells you what kind of relationship you're looking at between consumption and income. And interest rate goes up, what happens to your consumption?
Goes down.
Goes down, so we should have a negative sign. If your wealth goes up, what happens to consumption? Goes up. And theta refers to animal spirit, an increase in theta, people are optimistic, that's what it refers to, and a decrease in theta would be pessimism. So I'll assign a plus sign here too. An increase is optimism, and therefore consumption level would rise. So no, that captures everything we discussed so far. Is that fine with everybody? Okay. Now, what we'll do for our purpose, as I said, we are starting with a very simple model, right? And so we'll keep it simple for the time being. So what we'll do, we'll assume that other factors other than the income, let's forget about them for the time being. I'll bring them later. When we have a fully developed model, we'll get all those things back in the model. Right? For the time being, our consumption is just a function of household income. Okay? That's all we'll use for the time being. And we know it's positive related. So keep that in mind, consumption is a function of income. Now, we did not look at, you can always include government policies, for example, taxes, right? Taxes will also influence your consumption level. And we'll incorporate that when we discuss, chapter 9, when we bring government, right? Government taxes, and that's going to affect your consumption as well. So those things, we'll keep them aside for the time being. The only thing we need is consumption is a function of household income. All right? So if you have to plot this relationship, what would it look like? Let's look at it. So on the horizontal axis you have household income, and on the vertical axis you have consumption. Okay. So consumption is going to be positive, even if your income is zero. Is that obvious? Isn't it? Even if you do not earn anything, your consumption is going to be positive. You have to eat, right? You have to spend money in food, you have to have shelter, clothing, basic necessities, right? Even if you don't earn. So consumption is not going to be negative or, you'll start at zero. You'll start at some positive level, even if your income is zero for the time being. You will find money from somewhere to borrow money, pester your parents, or whatever you do, use your past saving and so on. But you have to have a positive consumption. So let's say you start at this level, some positive number. Okay, that's your consumption. My income is zero, and after that, as income increases, your consumption increases, isn't it? And if you observe any person, your consumption function would look like this. So as your income initially increases, consumption increases, maybe proportionately, maybe at a higher rate. But then, as your income keeps on increasing, consumption will start slowing down. It's still increasing, it's still positive, but it starts slowing down. The rate of change is less than the rate of change in income, at higher income levels. That's what you're saying here. That's the average behavior of a consumer. Okay? Not for one particular consumer, but if you look at all consumers and try to find what is the average behavior, you should see something like that kind of pattern. Okay? Is that fine with everybody so far? Any questions, comments? Okay. So what we are going to do, we are going to linearize this, make it straight line. Okay, just for simplicity, it will be easier to do our analysis after that. So we'll assume. So now we are going to refer Y as aggregate income or aggregate output. You're looking at the whole economy, not at one consumer or a group of consumers. Okay. So you're looking at aggregate output or real GDP, and this is your aggregate consumption, total consumption of all the households in the economy. That's what we are interested in. As if you want to calculate GDP, you need to know total consumption of all the households in the economy. So think of C as aggregate consumption, and think of Y as your aggregate income. Okay. So the relationship that we have between consumption, aggregate consumption, and aggregate income is, as I said, I'm going to make it linear function. So the consumption function is a straight line like this. and it starts at some level, positive consumption. Let's say that's your A. And this is your straight line consumption function. So since it's a straight line, I can express it using a straight line equation, which is C equals to A plus B times Y. I'll explain these terms. C is your aggregate consumption, and Y is your aggregate income in the economy. Okay. Now, what are A and B? What are those terms representing? Let's talk about it.
Would A be your starting aggregate consumption?
So let's start with A. A is autonomous consumption. What it means is that even if your income is zero, you don't earn anything, right? You still have to consume some positive amount. So what is that amount? That's A. That's level. Some dollar figure you can put it. $100 for a person. Even if you don't earn anything, you spend, let's say, $100 a month, isn't it? On consuming, something, food, clothing, housing, things like that. Hypothetical number. So so that's your A, autonomous consumption. And what is B? You're familiar with, the equation of a straight line from your high school math class. What is the equation of a straight line? Y equals to mx plus b, right? Something like that. What is m in that equation? The slope of the line. So it looks similar, isn't it? M is your b here. Can you see that? So b is basically slope of the consumption function, right? So b is the slope of consumption function. Slope of consumption function. So to calculate slope, you need 2 points on a straight line, isn't it? So it's a straight line, so slope is going to be constant, if you remember that from our review. Wiki review, no, that's from Macroeconomics review. But you guys familiar with slope? Okay. So it's a rise over run. So let's take 2 points over here and here. So slope is basically, this is your rise, and this is your run. So slope is rise over run. Isn't it? So you can think of rise as change in consumption, isn't it? Look at rise. You're looking at 2 values corresponding to C. What happened here? So rise is basically, you are at this point. So you got one coordinate here, let's say y1. This is problem. So that's your y1, and that's your c1 over here, isn't it? Another one is this one, y2, and that's your c2. So what is rise here? Can you tell me? So you move from y1 to y2, consumption rises from c1 to c2. So what is rise here? C2 minus C1. That's correct. So C2 minus C1. And what is run? Y2 minus Y1. That's correct. So that's your basically formula to calculate slope. And slope is basically B in this, isn't it? Everybody fine with this so far? What do we mean by slope? Okay. Some of you in this class are taking microeconomics. We reviewed that. But those who are not, as you know, I'm just doing it for you just so that you remember it. Okay. So rise over run, or change in consumption divided by change in income, is your slope here, right? Okay. So what does B mean? What is the economic interpretation of B? We know it's slope, right? But what does it mean in our context? Let me clarify that. Let's go to the next slide. So B is, or slope, is the marginal propensity to consume. So B refers to marginal propensity to consume. Okay? Or, in its abbreviated form, you can use MPC, marginal propensity to consume. So what it means in simple words is that if a consumer's income goes up by $1, let's say, okay, so you earn $1 extra. How much of that extra dollar you consumed is marginal propensity to consume. So I give you $1 extra in income, right? What fraction of that extra dollar you consume? Let's say 80 cents, right? So marginal propensity to consume would be 0.8 in this example, isn't it? Your income goes up by $1 and you consume 80 cents out of that $1, right? That's your MPC. So 0.8 would be your MPC in this example, okay? And MPC, marginal propensity to consume, for an economy, if you look at the economy, everybody's, and you basically looking at some kind of average figure for, it's stable. It doesn't change by much, It changes, but over time, it doesn't change, quickly. So, that's your MPC. Is that fine with everybody? What we mean by marginal propensity to consume? Okay. So now in this economy, the model we are considering, we have only households and firms, no government, no financial institutions, no foreign sector, right? So what do you do with the remaining 20 cents?
Save it.
Save it, isn't it? That's what you're going to do. You keep it under your mattress, probably. You don't have banks in this economy yet, right? So basically you're going to save it with you. So what would you call it? 0.2. What is it? Analogous to MPC, what would you call it? So I give you $1 extra and 80 cents you are spending on consumer items, right? Consumer goods and services. You call it marginal propensity to consume. And therefore, you are saving 20 cents, isn't it? Because there's no other use of the money in this our simple economy, right? Government is not there to tax your money. You don't have banks, you're not spending in foreign, something like that. So what would you call this 20 cents then? Marginal propensity to save, MPS, straightforward. So we have marginal propensity to save. Or MPS, which in our example is 0.2. Isn't it? So MPS would be what fraction of your extra income is saved, isn't it? What fraction of your extra income is saved? And that's your MPS here. So if you add up MPC and MPS, what would you get?
So your total income.
Marginal propensity to consume and marginal propensity to save. If you add it up, what would you get? Anybody? Look at the numbers.
1.
1. That's correct. Always the case, in this model. So if you save MPC and MPS, you will get 1. Triple equal sign means it's always true in this model. Okay, the way we have defined it. Okay. So MPC plus MPS equals to 1. So you can always play with this, and if I give you MPC and I ask you to calculate MPS, you should be able to do that, isn't it? 1 minus MPC gives you MPS. Or if I give you MPS, you can find MPC, just by playing with this identity. All right, so that's your marginal propensity to consume and marginal propensity to save. Okay. So let me write down the equation to capture saving function. We know consumption function. Consumption equals to A plus B times Y, isn't it? Right? We discussed in the previous slide. Consumption equals to A plus B times Y. And you know what is the meaning of A and what is the meaning of B, right? So let's try to find a counterpart of that for savings. Let's look at saving function. Saving function is a mirror image of consumption function. You know consumption function, you can derive saving function from it. Okay. So when your income is 0, what is saving equal to?
0, 0.
Is it true? In this model? Think about it. Let me write consumption function. So consumption function is over here. Let me write C equals to A plus B times Y, isn't it? In this model, that's your consumption function. So I'm saying, look at this consumption function. When your income is 0, your consumption equals to A, right? You're not earning any income, but you still consume positive amount A, some dollar, isn't it? Now, where is that A coming from? You don't earn anything. It's coming from your past savings, isn't it? You're not currently earning anything, but you're still consuming A. It has to come from, in this model, simple model, from your savings. So your income is 0. What is savings equal to?
Is it greater than 0?
Greater than 0? I already gave you the clue. Your consumption is financed by past savings, right? When your income is 0. So you are consuming A when your income is 0. So what is the level of saving when your income is 0? Negative A, exactly. Isn't it? It has to be negative A. Because you are withdrawing money from your savings account to pay for your consumption, isn't it? It has to match. Is that fine with everybody? Let's say you spend $100. You don't earn anything, right? You're spending $100 on food and clothing and shelter. Your savings account will be depleted by $100, isn't it? It has to have a negative sign attached to it. So that's your savings, autonomous saving, you can say in this case. But don't use that word. And then, what is the relationship between savings and income? As income increases, your saving will also increase, right? Positive. But what is the slope of saving function? MPC was the slope of consumption function. So what is going to be the slope of saving function?
The MPS.
The MPS, that's correct. And how do you write MPS here? B is your MPC. So what would be MPS equal to?
PC minus 1.
MPC minus 1 or
1 minus MPC.
1 minus MPC, isn't it? 1 minus MPC is your MPS. So you can write 1 minus what? How do we capture MPC? B. So 1 minus B times 1. That's your savings function. C is exact opposite of what you have in the consumption function. Right? Mirror image of that. So if you know consumption function, you should be able to derive savings function, right? A becomes negative A, B becomes 1 minus B. Okay? So that's your savings function. Let's plot it. So if I plot savings function, so you have income here and savings here, and that's your 0. So when income is 0, what is savings equal to? Go back to your equation. We are trying to plot savings equals to negative A plus 1 minus B times 1. So when your income is 0, savings equals to? Negative number. What is that negative number? Negative A. So let's say negative A is here. So you got one coordinate here, right? And then as income increases, savings is going to rise. And it's a linear function, as you can see. It's an equation of a straight line, once again, right? So this will rise like this. And that's your savings function. At some income level, savings will be 0, and then it starts becoming positive after that. And slope of this saving function is 1 minus B. Change in savings divided by change in income. Similar to your consumption function. You understand consumption function, you should not have any difficulty in understanding the savings function. Okay? Questions? Anything not clearly understood?
So what, like you said, A equals autonomous consumption.
Yeah.
What does that represent, like, in
The savings function.
it's your savings?
You can say autonomous savings, but I won't use that term. I'm just saying when income is 0, how much you save. Your saving is basically negative because it finances your positive consumption at that income level. Isn't it? Exact same amount. So you can, you can call it, but it has no real. Go ahead.
Can you only use this when your income is 0?
Yeah, A is basically only when your income is 0. It's a hypothetical case. We're saying, hypothetically speaking, that you don't earn anything, right? What is your consumption then? Anything else? All right, so next let's use a numerical example to look at savings function and consumption function using some simple numbers, and then we'll plot it again. So, unless you have some questions for me right now. So let's look at. So let's try to plot that information, okay, using the actual numbers. Or just using A, 1 minus B, and so on, right? So let's just use simple numbers. So we'll stick to that consumption function. Consumption function is your, let me give you some numbers now. A is less 100, okay? And B is 0.8, and then your Y is your income. We are going to plot this. So what we are going to do first, let's construct a table where you have income, different levels of income. You know, your income is 0, your income is 100, income is 200, 300, and so on. And then you have consumption corresponding to each income level. Okay? So let me fill one for you, and then you will understand how to do the rest. When income is 0, plug in 0 here. What do you get consumption equal to? 100. So 0 goes against 100. Now next is income is 100. Let's say your income goes up to $100 from 0. Plug in 100 over there. What do you get consumption equal to? 180. That's correct. So that's your consumption. So you do the rest now. In a similar fashion. Do they match with your calculations? Okay. So that's your consumption. Now from this, you can always calculate. Suppose I didn't give you this information, right? Forget about it. Suppose this did not happen. But I have given you this information. I have given you income and also corresponding level of consumption, right? And I ask you to calculate marginal propensity to consume. How would you do it? Go ahead.
Don't you take like C2 minus C1
Divided by
over Y2 minus
minus y.
Y1?
So let's do that and see what you get. Pick any two figures, like successive figures, and try to do that. See what you get. What do you have?
0.8.
0.8. So what did you do? What numbers did you use here?
I just used the first two.
First two. So basically you are saying income goes up from 0 to 100, right? Consumption increases from 100 to 180, isn't it? So basically you are looking at 180 minus 100, C2 minus C1, right? And then you have Y2 is 100, Y1 is 0. So 80 over 100, 0.8. So you are able to calculate marginal propensity to consume, even if I did not give you the equation. Isn't it? Is that fine with everybody so far? Okay. If something is not clear, let me know. I can go back. I have plenty of time.
So is B then is MPS always or no?
B is always MPC here in our model. 1 minus B is your MPS. So what you calculated is marginal propensity to consume, MPC. Right? This is your P.
That includes the what?
Go ahead.
The Y. The Y is your income.
Y is your income. This just gives you what is the value of P. this exercise because you just calculated slope, isn't it, of this relationship between consumption and income, isn't it? But next I would ask you to do, I didn't give you this equation, I would say what is the consumption function, let's say, right? So you have to identify A then. Suppose I did not give you this information at all, right? I just give you this 2 columns basically. And based on that, I'm asking you to write down the consumption function. How would you already identified the slope of the consumption function, which is B, 0.8, right? What is A now? That's the other thing you have to identify, and then you are done. A equals to what? 100. You look at income equals to 0 and corresponding level of consumption, isn't it? So the moment you identify A, your consumption function is A plus B times Y. So A is 100, B is 0.8 times Y. You can write that equation, isn't it? Does that make sense to everybody? Are you clear now about it, or?
I'm still trying to figure
Okay.
it out. Sorry.
Let me erase this. Don't look at this. Okay? I want you to write that. Isn't it? So, how would you write consumption function? You know the generic form of consumption function is C equals to A plus B times Y. So first thing you would do is try to calculate slope, right? Or that might be second thing after identifying A. But we have already calculated slope. You know how to calculate slope. So you identified B. B is 0.8. Isn't it? Next you have to identify A. What is A equal to? 100. Isn't it? When income is 0, consumption is 100. So based on that, you would write consumption equals to A, which is 100, plus B, which is 0.8, times income. And that's your consumption function.
What could it be? Any of it could be any of those.
Any numbers, you can choose anywhere. B will always be the same,
Alright.
because it's a straight line. Remember, B is the slope, and slope across a straight line does not change, as in it's not a curve. Okay. Is that fine now?
Yeah.
All right. Now, so you know, now we can calculate consumption. How about finding savings now? What is savings function? Can you do that? From this. Now keep in mind that in our 2-sector economy, savings is equal to what? Income left after paying for consumption, isn't it? So you can write savings equals to Y minus C. So you already have income, you have consumption, you can calculate savings. And I want you to give me the savings function. Negative A plus 1 minus B times Y. You have to give me the numbers for that. So that's your task now. Let's do that. So first thing you will do is calculate savings at each income level using that equation I gave you. You have that? So what did you do?
For the S column,
Mm-hmm. So you have all the numbers? Okay, what are the numbers?
I have negative 100, negative 80, negative 60, negative 40, negative 20, 0.
So you got that. So that's your savings number corresponding to income figures. Next you have to write down the savings function. So what's your savings function equal to? Negative A plus 1 minus B times 1. So what are the numbers? Negative 100 plus,
0.21.
that's correct. So your saving function here would be equal to negative 100 plus 0.21. Go ahead.
Why is it negative 100 not positive 100 if it's negative?
Saving function is always in a mirror image of, so you're looking at negative A, we are saying, what is that? Basically that, think of it some letter, and it's saying when your income is 0, what is savings equal to? Okay.
Even though it's negative A?
That way, just to identify with consumption function. Because consumption is A, just to make it, negative.
Okay.
Okay? Straightforward way, just look at this number, negative 100. When your income is 0, saving equals to negative 100. Think of it that way. Is that fine?
Yeah.
All right. So you are able to write down the savings function now. Isn't it? So even if I don't give you the equation, if I just give you income and consumption or income and savings for that matter, you should be able to play with the numbers and you should be able to write down the consumption function as well as the saving function. Isn't it? Okay. The next task is to plot these. So can you plot savings function as well as the consumption function in two different graphs? First plot consumption function, then also plot savings function in a different way using these numbers. So you got the numbers.
Just lite för... man får också om det... Men... Go ahead.
Would the lines be parallel?
For savings and consumption function,
They wouldn't.
the
be.
slopes are different.
Yes, they would.
So they should not be parallel, yes. One would be steeper. Do you have your graph now? So, yeah, it looks fun to me.
Could you do it on the board?
Sure, yeah, that's what I was thinking if you need to do it. So we got this. Let's try to plot consumption function first. We got C and Y on the horizontal axis, right? So when income is 0, what is consumption equal to?
100.
100. So let's say 100 is here. We use a different color. So you got one coordinate here. And then we know as income increases by $1, consumption increases by 80 cents. Isn't it? That's your slope. So after that's positive, as income increases, so we know if it's 100 over here, income, consumption would be how much? 180. So you'll be somewhere here. 180 is here, let's say. And then if income is 200, it becomes how much? 260?
Yeah.
And so on. So we just need two points to connect because it's a straight line, isn't it? So I already have sufficient points, more than 2 actually, and that's your consumption function. Okay. And then you need to plot savings function. Let's use the same one. So I'm going to use this. Let me extend this in the negative quadrant. And let's say 100, negative 100 is here. So saving is, now you want to plot savings function, right? So when your income is 0, what is savings equal to? Minus 100. So I have this. And then I know as income increases from 0 to some positive level, savings will rise by 20 cents for every dollar increase in income, isn't it? In other words, slope is 0.2, right? So when your income is 100, savings becomes what, 80? So 80 would be here. When income is 200, savings is how much? 60, negative 60,
Yeah.
negative 80, negative 60, and so on. So you will get a line like this. That's your savings function. Even though they look, parallel, but they should not be. This is a flatter line than that one. That's a steeper line. 0.8 slope. This is just 0.2 slope. Okay. So if you plot in the graph paper, they will look, different. They're going different. Different. Slope will be different. Is that fine with everybody? So you have to tell me without looking at suppose I give you the equation, savings function and consumption function. So forget about consumption function, just the savings function. And I give you this, and I want you to identify the level of income at which saving equals to 0. Can you do that? Go ahead.
You would just set the S equals 0, right?
S equals to 0 and solve for y. Solve for y. Isn't it? And you will get there. So, for example, in our, where is our savings function? So savings equals to negative 100 plus 0.2 y. So from this, suppose I just give you this. I don't give you the table. I just give you the equation. And I'm asking you to tell me at what level of income saving equals to 0. Let's solve for it and see what you get.
Can you say that again?
At what level of income, y, saving equals to 0? Because saving starts at negative 100, right? And it becomes negative 80, negative 60. So I want you to tell me what is the income at which, go ahead. Income, GDP, what level of income savings equals to 0?
For that equation,
20? What do you have? How much? 500? 500? 500 should be the answer. Let's see. So plug in savings equals to 0 because this is what you want to know. At what income level savings equals to 0? And y is the only unknown now, isn't it? Because you have plugged in the value for savings. So 0 equals to negative 100 plus 0.2y. Therefore, y equals to what? So
100 over.
add 100 both sides. You get this equals to 0.2y. Then divide both sides by 0.2, isn't it? So you get 100 divided by 0.2 equals to y. Therefore, y equals to 500. So when y equals to 500, savings equals to 0. So let's go back to the previous slide. And over here, this is your 500, where saving function hits the y-axis, horizontal axis, isn't it? When you plot, you need to identify where it hits the y-axis, right? And after income increases up beyond 500, savings becomes positive. Okay? Any questions, comments so far? All right, good. So that's your consumption function, savings function. They all are related to one sector of the economy, isn't it? And that sector is? Which sector? What are we looking at? Households, isn't it? And we are in a two-sector economy, as I said. We have households and firms. So we just looked at the expenditure by the households, which is captured by C, consumption, aggregate consumption. Next, we have to look at the investment part of it, which is expenditure by firms on what? Do you remember what investment refers to from chapter 6? I defined it for you. So without looking at notes, if you can tell me, I want to see if you still remember it. Even vaguely, what investment is. Nobody remembers it. Go ahead.
Is that when, are you talking about what we learned first, like about investment?
Yeah.
Like when your example of the car
Mhm.
is being sold in 2014, but it doesn't get sold until 2015.
Unsold inventory. That's part of investment, but that's not everything about investment. That's true. You're right about it. If a firm has produced some goods and is not able to sell in that year, that finished good, right? It goes to unsold inventory, and that becomes part of the investment. That's correct. But what else goes in investment? If you remember, investment refers to the purchase of plants, equipments, structures, and unsold inventories. All those are expenses by, you can think of those, capturing, the expenditure side of the firms. Firms spend, money on, buying new plants, expanding their plant side, buying new tools, equipments, all those things, structures. So all those are basically going to represent the firm side in this model. Okay? So investment, let's talk about it briefly. We have some time. So let me just write it again for your reference. Investment refers to the purchase of plants, equipment, structures, and unsold inventories. Also, if you remember from national income accounting, that purchase of new housing by the households is also included in this. That's what investment was. When you buy a new house, the Bureau of Economic Analysis treats it as an investment, and not as your consumption, if you remember that. But don't worry about it. Structures will capture that aspect. So we just want to keep it simple. So that's your investment. So investment goods are, basically you're looking at capital accumulation in the economy, isn't it? You're accumulating capital. The capital goods are those goods that we have produced and we use it to make goods and services, other goods and services. Think of it that way. Okay? So we'll represent investment by the term I. I captures investment. And we'll call it planned investment, planned level of investment. So I refers to the planned level of investment by firms. So I is your planned level of investment by firms. Now, planned or desired level of investment, firms, plan ahead of time how much they are going to invest. They'll know what would be their investment next year. They already make plans to, expand their plant size, or build a new plant or buy some new tools, things like that. They make all those decisions ahead of time. So we can call it planned level of investment or desired level of investment. Okay. However, planned level of investment may or may not be equal to the actual level of investment in that year. So let me write it and then we'll talk about it. The planned level of investment may or may not be equal to the actual investment. Do we have to leave? Yeah. Fire alarm, right? I hope that's what it is.
Oh, the red one?
Yeah.